Welcome to UN Weekly. I'm Conor Lennon. Now, as this show is still fairly new, I thought it'd be a good idea just to remind you of what this is all about, why we're here. Well, we're looking at a news story from a UN angle each week. That's going to be our main focus. And this week, we're going to go nuclear. Well, we love acronyms here. So here's a nice four-vowel one, IAEA. Which really trips off the tongue, doesn't it? That's the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has been around since the 1950s. Now, back then, the world had recently discovered the awesome power of atomic bombs and the existential threat of all-out nuclear war. At the same time, the technology offered the hope of cheap, ever-present electricity. So a bit of a dichotomy there. Well, more recently, the fact that nuclear power doesn't produce any greenhouse gases has pushed it to the front of climate discussions. So today we're going to hear from the head of the IAEA, Rafael Mariano Grossi, and to hear what he had to say about the nuclear option. And we're going to find out some more about the lesser known but still extremely useful and interesting applications of nuclear technology. But as always, we will start with a news roundup. And this week I'm joined in the studio by Dezhe Xu, UN correspondent for China Global Television News. And I hope I pronounced your name a bit better this time.
Way better.
Fantastic. I'm getting there. My Chinese lessons are making slow progress. And from the offices of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, my former colleague, still my colleague, Lara Quinones. You're still my colleague. I mean, it's all one big happy family, isn't it, Lara?
Of course.
Well, thanks for being with us, Lara. Let me start with you. The FAO, for those who don't know what the FAO is, can you just give us a brief summary of what the agency is all about?
Of course, it is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. As you said, our birthday is World Food Day, which is October 16, in 1945, actually. And we lead the international efforts to defeat hunger. We have many achievements. Many of you have probably heard about the Codex Alimentarius. These are the international standards that ensure safe and good food for everyone. We have also helped eradicating deadly livestock diseases such as rinderpest and river blindness in 11 West African countries. And very importantly, we maintain the world's largest statistical database on food and agriculture, and we lead on the report that is called SOFI, and that gives us the status of hunger in the world every year. And there are many other achievements, but that's a short, brief summary.
And there's some recent reports that came out, and there's some interesting things we're going to pull out of those a little later in the discussion. But let me come back to you, Dezhe, because obviously the big story is, again, this week, Gaza. We've had a lot of Gaza news this week. We won't have time to go into all of it. It's all on UN News, but let's start with the resolution at the beginning of the week, because I think that was where the news all started to really ramp up.
Yes, I have the resolution here. This is for our reporters, we feel it's a very unusual resolution because normally the UN Security Council would have a resolution when a deal has been reached and they would use the resolution to endorse that deal. But this time, it's welcoming a deal that is still
to be done.
In talking. Yes.
And the deal we're talking about here, it's a deal it's the deal in which Israel would stop the bombings in Gaza, and Hamas would agree to release all the Israeli hostages, and that would be the precondition, the stage one of this American-led resolution to get to an eventual long-term peace agreement.
Yes, and the thing is, now everybody is waiting for their answers. It seems very confused to, I think, UN reporters, like all parties, they are saying the different things. But ultimately, we know that the UN, the Secretary General, always called for immediate humanitarian ceasefire as well as releasing of hostages and expansion of humanitarian access. So it would be better to implement this resolution sooner rather than later. And this is the resolution, but obviously we have two reports.
Yeah.
3 reports to be exact, actually.
But it's still we'll come to that in a second, but it's still a big moment. I mean, many of these resolutions have been stymied by the fact that one of the permanent members which have a veto have decided to exercise that veto, whether it's Russia or China or the US. But on this one, the US was the penholder, meaning that they were the ones that presented this to the Security Council. Nobody vetoed it. There was one abstention from Russia, which is one of the 5 permanent members, but that meant that it was adopted. So still a big moment.
Yes, I think this is kind of showing the unity of the council now. They obviously everybody want the war to stop, but the thing is how to implement it. Just like I said, because we have now 4 resolutions on Gaza after October 7th. So, if we look back, all those resolutions, what those resolutions called or urged, has them been implemented? It's a very big issue. But as the deputy permanent representative of the United States, Mr. Robert Wood, said, this one is binding. So we hope to see that this one could make a real difference.
Yeah, and as we record this show, we're still in wait and see mode, aren't we? Yeah. You, the UN correspondents, and
we're watching it very closely, yeah.
And you mentioned a couple of interesting, important, troubling reports as well from the UN. First of all, let's start with the International Commission of Inquiry. Now, this is the Commission of Inquiry on the occupied territories in Palestine, and it said, well, the top line figure here was that both sides are held responsible for war crimes.
Yes. The report just showed that both Hamas and Israel committed war crimes for mounting attacks against civilian populations. And in the report, it particularly said that Israel has already committed crimes against humanity. They listed many examples like torture, extermination, and gender persecution against Palestinian men and boy. So, well, this is still under review. I mean, next week the Human Rights Council would make a discussion on this report, and we will see how it goes.
And it also detailed the atrocities that it says were committed by Hamas in the conflict, and the Children and Armed Conflict report, which comes out every year, and it's talking about war crimes committed against children in many parts of the world. It does mention the occupied territories, and Israel is mentioned for the first time. But you looked at that report and you wanted to mention the fact that this is not the only, but far from being, unfortunately, the only example of war crimes committed against children.
It's a really, really sad report from my personal point of view. The language the report using is that in 2023, the level of violations against children has reached an extreme level. We're talking about occupied Palestinian territory as well as Israel, but that's not the only conflict zone that we saw all those grave violations against children. There are more than 20 conflicts. We saw South Sudan, Lebanon, Syria, Ukraine, Yemen, Haiti. The most impressive, or the number that occurred to me, is that the grave violation against children in Sudan last year increased 480%. 480%. Bear this in mind. Why I feel like this is very staggering to me is because this is a conflict that is still going on, just like the conflict in Gaza. So this is only the number of 2023. We have 6 months already. They're still ongoing.
Yeah, it's a very grim report, as you say. And another important report that came out this week from the UN was the UNHCR, that's the Refugee Agency Global Trends report, which is showing historic levels of displacement, 120 million people by May of this year, and that's the 12th increase over 12 years, the 12th annual increase. And Sudan was picked out as a key factor, and also the climate crisis, which is, of course, having a big effect on the production of food and hunger. Laura, I'm talking to you now in Rome, and, well, we've had a couple of things to pick out food-related this week, haven't we? There's been the Food Commodity Price Index, and I've been looking at your reports over the last few months and years, and the climate crisis frequently comes up as a factor.
Yes, indeed. We just published our Food Outlook report. It's a report that comes every 2 years and talks about the commodity markets. So, a commodity is a raw material or a primary agricultural product that you can buy, let's say rice, sugar, and wheat. We produce this report every 2 years. And for now, we're predicting that in 2024, 2025, there is going to be sort of like a stable outlook. However, like you mentioned, the climate crisis represented in this extreme weather also conflicts, rising geopolitical tensions, some sudden policy changes, and other factors could change this outlook.
I also noticed your press release from World Food Safety Day, which took place this week. And the thing that jumped out at me was the fact that 1.6 million people get sick every day because of poor quality food.
It's a very big problem. This is a day that we commemorate along with the World Health Organization. Indeed, like you say, 1.6 million people become sick for eating unsafe food every day. And children under 5 carry the worst of the burden. 40% of the people that get sick are children under 5. Also, people with low resources. And foodborne illness is also, they're responsible for 420,000 preventable deaths every year. So World Food Safety Day actually can save lives. And what WHO and FAO want you to know is that this is everybody's business, meaning the producers, the farmers, and also the companies that process our food, and ourselves at home can also prevent these safety issues, like, for example, cooking our food better, making sure everything is clean, and that kind of thing. And I invite you all to go to our Food Safety Day website. Just Google it, and you'll find all these tips and tricks to make sure that you're eating safe food.
And there is, of course, a link between food and nuclear technology, but we'll come to that in just a second, because before we get into our main subject, which is nuclear technology, I want to say a few words about a major event that took place here at UN headquarters this week. It was the 17th Conference on the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which millions depend on to help guarantee their human rights. It's the biggest international conference on disability in the world, and it featured senior UN officials, including the President of the General Assembly and the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed. And for the first time ever, UN News handed the reins of its live page to a guest editor. He is Nick Hurd. He's an activist and talk show host with Down syndrome, and he spent the week live blogging from the iconic General Assembly Hall. He sat down with my colleague Sinead Hart and explained the importance of the event for people living with disabilities.
We still need to keep the project going way further, and stay not just stay in the project, but also inviting people to be involved with this project of inclusion and voices being heard, and recognizing those voices. And the way to do that is by not just by talking, but using actions. And together we can create a better world where everyone belongs.
That was disability rights activist Nick Hurd reporting from the conference on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. You can find out more, of course, about the conference on UN News, and we'll have links in the show description. Now, it is time to talk about all things nuclear. We're going to hear that interview with Rafael Mariano Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, in just a moment. But first, here's our resident explainer, Pauline Batista, to give us a potted history of the atomic wing of the UN.
Hello there, my name is Pauline Batista, and this is the UN Explained. Now, what is nuclear technology, and what's the role of the UN in it? For starters, the UN has an entire agency dedicated to just that, and it is called the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. The IAEA was created in 1957 in response to fears and expectations connected to discoveries and uses of nuclear technology. Let's just say that nuclear technology has not always been used for the best. So, member states came together to create standards around the use of such powerful technology. We can say that IAEA works for the safe, secure, and peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology. And, of course, like all UN things, the idea is to contribute to international peace and security and the global goals. That was a lot of information. If you're interested in learning more about nuclear technology and IAEA, you can go to news.un.org and search IAEA.
Many thanks to Pauline for clearing that up. Now, this week, the IAEA held a conference at its Vienna headquarters on managing spent fuel from nuclear reactors. It's the often highly reactive waste from the nuclear fission process that creates energy. And it highlights the importance of dealing safely with the waste. And there were discussions about the feasibility of burying it deep underground for several hundred years. Well, I thought this would be a good excuse to have a chat with Rafael Mariano Grossi about the pros and cons of nuclear technology. And I started by asking him whether the inclusion of nuclear as a low-carbon energy source at the last UN climate conference, the first time that's ever happened, is likely to mean that, despite the safety issues, it will become more popular and even mainstream in coming years.
It's been very important in terms of public perception, in terms of policies, in terms of public understanding. Nuclear is already playing a big role in clean energy delivery, so to speak. To give you an idea, more than a third of clean energy produced today in the world is nuclear. Or in Europe, where I live, half of the clean energy which is produced, by clean I mean CO2 free, is of nuclear origin. So it is already part of the solution. The problem is that for many, many years, for a variety of reasons that have to do with Chernobyl or later Fukushima, etc., there has been a lot of pushback. There have been what we believe from the IAEA has been misinformation about what nuclear energy is or is not. So in this sense, there has been, and we take this very, very seriously, there has been societal, in some places, not in every place, in some places there has been societal concern about nuclear energy as a technology. So this, of course, reverberated into the conferences and meetings and policy gatherings about energy in general. So much so that in this process of the big conferences on climate change, the so-called COPs, in these places, nuclear was very resisted, not talked about, not mentioned, and sometimes even rejected as a whole. So I think it is a Copernican, step when you go from that to say, as it was said in Dubai, that nuclear energy alongside renewables should be accelerated. So not only tolerated, not only accepted where it is already, but accelerated. And coupled with that, a number of countries, important countries in Dubai, as a parallel event or a side event, as people say these days, they committed to triple their own percentage of nuclear energy. So I think sometimes people ask me, so is this a renaissance of nuclear energy? I like to say that this is a return to realism. It's a return to realism because people who are not necessarily in the nuclear area, I might cite the International Energy Agency, which is one of the most, if not the most respected think tank of energy issues, or the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a gathering of the greatest and the brightest scientists from all over the world studying these issues, have recognized in their modeling that if you take away nuclear energy from the equation, decarbonize by 2050 would be almost impossible. So what we say is, yes, there's going to be acceleration. And in this thing, we will have to, and the IAEA and the UN system in general, which we represent in this sense, will have to be very present to make sure that this happens as it has been the case as up until today, in a safe way, in a secure way, in a way that does not promote proliferation of nuclear weapons. I mean, what the IAEA does as part of its mandate, because its mandate is bigger than that. But that is my general take on your question.
Well, I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said. First of all, you said talk about the misinformation in the wake of disasters such as Chernobyl, Fukushima, and the societal issues surrounding that. Can you give me some examples of the sort of misinformation that you're countering?
The conventional wisdom is that thousands of people died because of radiation in Fukushima. Not a single person died because of that. Thousands of people died because of the tsunami, but there was no victim as a result of radiation. It was a big accident. It was a bad accident. Let me be very clear. We analyze accidents. We need to prevent them. So I'm not diminishing or in any way banalizing what happened. But there has been this accepted idea. The same goes to Chernobyl, where people say that millions of people are dying because of cancer, etc. There have been some cases. We have studied it with the WHO, with the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCARE, and other specialized bodies, and it has been very limited. When you look at the statistics, the stats, all right, not policy papers or propaganda, right? When you look at the stats, even from the WHO, you will see that in terms of mortality, nuclear is even lower than some renewable energies. So when you take the perspective throughout the years of the safety record of energy, two big accidents with enormous impact, and we need to tackle those things, and we have done it squarely and addressed it and talked with people and explained what happened and explained what kinds of safety measures are taken. I like to be very clear in these things, and I think we owe people the information.
That was Rafael Mariano Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And if you want to hear the full interview, you can find it on our UN Interviews podcast and also on the UN News page. And you can find that wherever you get your podcasts. Now, as promised, Laura, I did say that we'd be talking about the links between atomic energy and food. And there is a program called Atoms for Food. What is that all about?
Well, it is an initiative to help countries boost food security and tackle global hunger, of course, like it's our mandate. So we work with the IAEA in, for example, using nuclear techniques to enhance agricultural and livestock productivity, natural resources management, reduce food losses, ensure food safety. We've been working for about 60 years. This Atom for Food is a recent initiative, but the partnership with IAEA has been going on, like I said, for 60 years. So, for example, we can use isotopes to gather information about the soil and the water management. We can also use them for insect pest control and to ensure that we have food safety standards in certain to create surveillance of food hazards.
And as you say, it's been going on for many, many years, perhaps a lesser known use of nuclear technology. Now, Laura Doja, the moment that we've all been waiting for, and I'm sure you have, it is the year of the camelids. Now, I've just put a lovely, fluffy camel from Dubai onto the table, but camelids, it's not just camels, is it?
No. Well, camelids do include bactrian camels, which are the classic ones with the two humps that we all know and love. Dromedary camels, they have one hump. But we also have the American camelids, which are my favorite because I'm South American, which are the llamas and the alpacas, and also the less known vicuñas and guanacos that are very common in the southern South America. Well, this year is the International Year of Camelids. It was designated by the by the General Assembly, but FAO is the host and the lead on this celebration, the year-long celebration. We want to highlight how important they are for many cultures in the world, and at the same time how in the harshest conditions, we're in a climate crisis, in the harshest conditions, all these animals are able to provide us with milk, meat, and transportation.
For those who might be a bit sceptical about the idea of camel milk, I don't know if you've ever had any camel milk, Deja, but I understand you have, Laura. Describe camel milk to me. Sell it to me.
Well, actually, this week we had an expo about the International Year of the Camelids. And one of the interesting things that we got to taste of camelid products was ice cream, camelid ice cream. And it was delicious. I mean, gelato here, how they say it in Italy. It's delicious. It's just, it's very similar to the regular ice cream, but just a little bit more, let's say, sour a little bit, but in a good way. I don't know how to describe it, honestly, but it's nice. It's really tasty.
Okay, well, look, next time I come over to Rome, hopefully you can save me a pint of camel ice cream.
Why don't we have here in the headquarters?
We have it here, do we?
Why don't we have it?
Why don't we have
it here?
You're a powerful UN correspondent. Get the power of CGTN behind it and make it happen. I'm sure it will. Thank you both very much for being here today for a very informative show and your invaluable input as ever. You can go to the show description to find out more about all of the many stories we covered today, from the COP28, the UN Climate Conference Declaration on Nuclear as a Renewable Energy Source, Atoms for Food, the program between the UN International Atomic Energy Agency and FAO, the UN Disability Rights Convention, the reports we mentioned on the occupied Palestinian territories at the top in the news roundup, and of course, the International Year of Camelids. Now, if there are any subjects you want us to talk about, then do get in touch, unweekly@un.org. Studio production this week was by the indefatigable UN TV team. The editor was Brianna Rowe. The executive producer was Mita Hassali. UN Weekly is a UN News production.